Well, thank you, John, Jenny, and Stephen. I appreciate that. I got to hear that twice. That was awesome. Thank you so much for leading us and guiding us. And as a caveat, remember earlier in the service when the slides got all wonky and thrown off? That was all my fault. Totally my digs. I went back there and asked Amy a question, poor thing, and she was like, what? And she was like, missed that. So it's all on me. And then I said, let's try and see if we can each side do something different. No, I'm just kidding. So welcome to Stacey Croft. I'm one of your pastors here, and I've loved being with y'all. This is just a delight to be a part of this church family, and so thank you, and I'm grateful to be able to bring the Lord's word to you. One of the things that I don't know about you, but I think about as I was growing up was the kind of shows that I used to watch as a kid that were either kind of just fun cartoons or, quasi-educational or something like that. And, I know they've changed over the years. One of the things, old school used to be around. Sesame Street, still kind of around now. Sesame Street was, a lot of Muppets, puppets that did like educational things and would speak. And I know nowadays it's like become like the Saturday Night Live for kids, basically. There's like all these celebrities on there and stuff. And they do these skits from TV shows. I'm like, that's like way over their head. But the thing that was genius about it was that they would start the show by saying, this show is brought to you by the letter J, K, and the number 9. And you're like, okay. And as they began the show, they would start, every kind of skit or thing they did would involve the letters and number. So it'd be like, hey, we're going to jump, J. You're like, okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. K, we're going to kick 9. There are 9 of these things. And count, the count would go 9. He'd count all the things. And at the end, by the time at the end, as a kid, you're not really thinking about, you're like, dude, sweet. I just, JK9, awesome. And they go, this was brought to you by JK9. As adults, you're kind of like, oh, please, over and over. And I think there are moments like that where we come to the gospel and we come to the scriptures and we need to be reminded who we are as children, of just the elementary, beautiful simplicity of the good news of what is being brought to us. And I'm about to read from Psalm 25. We've been looking at the Psalms. We're soon to be landing the plane on the Psalms and beginning our next series in 1 Peter. But we're actually looking at a psalm. This is really interesting. This happens very rarely, where David begins each verse with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it goes all the way through from verses 1 through 21, and then 22 is almost like this conclusion. And so this morning I have 21 points. No, I'm just kidding. But it really is incredible. Like, you could slow it down, and he kind of wants you to do that. It actually was written in that way. It's written as a mnemonic device for the people of Israel, not just to sing it, but to remember it and to walk through it as children and to know verse by verse, line by line, how much easier it is to be reminded of God's goodness, his faithfulness. And the interesting thing even further about this psalm, as he mentions the language of instruction, knowing, leading, he's saying all these things couched in a psalm that is about pain and lamenting and difficulty. In fact, many commentators say this psalm is different than many others because the way he walks through lament, it's not these dramatic outbursts or it doesn't end in this triumphant tone. It actually calmly, honestly, and clearly walks us through what it's like to be lonely. He even uses a word, a language of, the troubles of my heart are enlarged. And what beautiful words and language to give us reality to that. So we're going to look at 3 parts of this psalm. I'm going to read it. And as I do, I'm going to tell you each point so you know where we're going. We're going to look at 3 R's, just to maintain the Sesame Street vibe. Remember, relationship, and refuge. Okay? Remember, relationship, and refuge. Let me read from Psalm 25, verses 1 through 22. This section, particularly 1 through 7, will describe how to remember. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be ashamed who are wantonly treacherous. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long. Remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love, for they have been from old. Remember not the sins of my youth or my transgressions. According to your steadfast love, remember me, for the sake of your goodness, O Lord. Beginning in verse 8 in this next section, he really highlights relationship. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he instructs sinners in the way. He leads the humble in what is right and teaches the humble his way. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and testimonies. For your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my guilt, for it is great. Who is the man who fears the Lord? Him will he instruct in the way that he should choose. His soul shall abide in well-being, and his offspring shall inherit the land. The friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant. The next section finishes with the refuge of the Lord. My eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Bring me out of my distress. Consider my affliction and my trouble, and forgive all my sins. Consider how many are my foes, and with what violent hatred they hate me. Oh, guard my soul and deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As we kind of enter into this psalm and look at the first few letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the door that David kind of presents is through the word shame, if you notice that. In fact, shame comes up at the very end of this as well. When he says in verse 2, "Oh my God, in you I trust, let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me." He says again, twice in verse 3, "Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be ashamed who are wantonly treacherous." Why through the door of shame? Well, the word shame for us can draw up a lot of different thoughts, maybe books we've read, podcasts we've listened to. Biblically, it's actually drawing out a different facet of shame here. It's not drawing out what we measure up to. It's actually saying that whatever we put our trust in, would it not prove false? Notice even the word when it says in verse 2, "Oh my God, in you I trust, let me not be put to shame." So shame here is the occurrence of putting your hope in something that completely falls through. Immediately when I thought of this, I thought about being a Vanderbilt fan, and as much as John Trapp, our pastor, went to Vandy, he knows how much I love Vandy because I worked there for so many years, and how you're a Vanderbilt fan at the beginning of every game, and I actually believe this, we will win this game. And when we won, I said we. I didn't even go there. I said we. When Vanderbilt beat Alabama, and they took the goalpost and they walked it down Broadway and threw it in the river. And you know why? Because they don't know what to do. They literally don't. It's hilarious. They had to fish it out of the river and go, okay, well, maybe we'll cut it up and sell it or something. That is actually a really good picture of this shame. It's putting your hope in something, your wish, what you desire, and it proving false. Now, we do that's a funny way we do it, and it's amazing how we can put our hopes in 18 to 22-year-olds every weekend and feel that awful feeling all week. But really, we do that with a lot of other things. We do that with multiple things in our lives that really can't hold up. It could be work. It could be something else. It could be an addiction. It could be a person that we lean into to to hope, to give us something, to find ourselves trustworthy, and yet it proves false. There's something that fails in that person or in that thing or something around us, and we either go back to it over and over to either numb our shame, to hide our shame, to avoid our shame. But what he's saying here, what David is trying to get us to understand is to remember that shame is deep embedded in our memories. And how it works is this. It says that the Lord is worthy to be trusted in. He alone. And it's not saying that he's not writing this to say, God, don't prove false. Don't mess up. He's actually saying, and being honest with God as we should be, to say, Lord, please let me not be put to shame. Remind me again of who you are. Because everything else around me is telling me different. He says a couple things. He says externally and internally. He says in verse 2, he says right away, my God, oh my God, I trust in you. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me. Now, it may be in your life an actual enemy. It may be voices around you. It may be circumstances. But things around you that constantly are telling you, do you really think God is trustworthy? There are other things you can put your trust in. There are other things that can deal with you not being shameful about your life. And he's saying, oh my God, in you I trust. What can hold that? The enemies, those things, those voices, maybe the recordings of growing up, even as David recalls this of being a youth, the things that you remember over and over of being said to you by a parent, by a teacher, by somebody else that just put it in you that you are not something, and you've always been working to make up for that. Something else you put your trust in just to say, yeah, Lord, but this really gives me more. Or within. What does he say? He says in verse 7, remember not the sins of my youth or my transgressions. It's not just outside, it's inside. Over and over, the things that we see in us that we're trying to work on, we're trying to manage, we're trying to take care of, that over and over are telling us, you have no hope. You can't do this. And between those external voices and internal voices, guess what? Our memory begins forming around what we think more than what God thinks of us. This is why he goes back to this in verse 6 and 7. Remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love, for they have been from old. Remember not the sins of my youth and my transgressions. According to your steadfast love, remember me. What is he doing? He's going to God's memory to inform his. In fact, Paul picks this up in Romans chapter 5, verse 5. He starts talking about this shame, and he starts talking about hope. And biblical hope is different. It's not a wish fulfillment. I remember this line from an episode of a Ted Lasso that says, it's the hope that kills you. And that's what most of us think. That we put our hope in something, it's a wish. We hope this proves true. We hope this comes to fruition. Biblical hope actually is very different in the way that it's established. It's a word that says there's something fixed. It does not move. And he brings us to it. So rather than a wish, it's God informing us of who we are before him. Think about what he's saying. Think about how much we need to hear the voice of God reminding us of who we are from him. Remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love, for they have been from old. Whose memory is much better than ours about how to be merciful towards ourselves? Reading the Bible, a pastor standing up telling you to read the Bible sounds like oh yeah, that sounds like every day. Do you know why? It's not that we just say that to you. And we need to know that ourselves, is because we have to go back over and over for our memory to be shaped by God's memory, not my own.
Remember when the people of, like right before this, you know, David is actually reading the word. He's reading the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And he's being reminded over and over of when the people of Egypt actually left. They walked on dry ground between 2 massive walls of water, the architectural language of the Hebrew in the Red Sea version. When they walked through, it's architectural language telling you they passed through halves of a sea. And what happens right when they get on the other side? They forget. They forget over and over and over. Is it because we're better than them? No, it's because we're just like them. And our memory does not remember God's mercy towards us. What we remember is verse 7. We think, I remember the sins of my youth. What does he pray? Remember not the sins of my youth or my transgression. According to your steadfast love. What is steadfast? Long suffering. Long. That his love for us is far outpaces our own love. And his memory informs ours. So we can approach our pain, the difficulty, the transgressions, the sin, the brokenness that we see in us and around us in a very different way. We can approach it with reality. Because, you know, then he moves right from there to verse 8 and following. When he says, good and upright is the Lord, and he starts to talk about who God is, his character. And in verse 14, he says, the friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant. I think it's really interesting that he moves from God's memory to God's relationship to him. Why? There was an article written some years ago that was passed along to me, and I think it was like circled around to a bunch of my buddies by a guy who wrote for the Boston Globe. And it was an article on men and loneliness. It just caught fire. I don't know how many views it had. But it was very spot on in the way that this guy unpacked. And he was not planning on writing this. His boss apparently said, hey, I want you to write on, relationships. And this is what he discovered. He discovered how men have no continuity. And the more he unpacked this article, by the way, it wasn't just for men. It was for men and women. He said that there lack continuity and relationship, and that loneliness is the epidemic. He even said this. He said, admitting you're lonely feels very much like admitting you can be a loser. Psychology has worked out to destigmatize things like depression, and in large part has been successful in those ways. But people are comfortable talking about depression, but they're not as comfortable saying they're lonely. Because it's like you're the kid sitting alone in the cafeteria. And the further you go down that rabbit hole of loneliness, the more you see this is a much broader epidemic in our culture. Not too long ago, the Surgeon General said the number one epidemic sweeping our country was not cancer and not obesity, it is loneliness. And in fact, if you do studies, physical studies, there are physical studies done of people who walk through lonely periods that actually have their white blood cell count change. And you can find how loneliness impacts your DNA. Why does God go into this about friendship? Is it just having a buddy? Is friendship what he's saying there, or is it more? Notice what he connects to. When he says friendship, it's unusual. It's not a word that's typically used to the Lord, as holy as he is, as separate as he is, as Andreas says. It's not like he just comes out and he's just like a buddy. It actually means that he's revealing himself and his plan. Friendship here means he's opening himself up for him to be known, and you are known by him. Jesus brought this up to his disciples in the upper room before he goes out to the cross, to Gethsemane and the cross. He talks about friendship. And this is what he says in John 15. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. No longer no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. That is astounding in so many ways. That the Lord of heaven and earth would make himself known to us. And when it says laying your life down for your friends, he's not talking about his death. He's actually talking about his life. He's saying laying your life down didn't mean that you're willing to die for someone. It meant, are you willing to live your life for someone? And what does Jesus do? He becomes the greatest of friends. He's the one that shows who he is. For him to say, you are no longer my servants. Now, he doesn't change in his status of teacher, nor does he change in who he is as Lord. But what he does is say, you are now my friends because you know me and I know you. The beauty of what it means to follow God, what it means to be a Christian, a Christ follower, means that God isn't hiding in his relationship. In fact, what he does is we are the ones who hid. If you will look back in the pages of Genesis and where it began, where sin enters into the picture in Genesis 3, it is God who says, where are you? And he's been asking that question ever since. Because he's the one who's the deep friend. And you know what's amazing about this? Ultimately, is it shows for us as children, what does it really mean to have a safe father? I'll tell you what, the ways that I have learned, and I've failed so many times, the ways that I have really been able to walk with my boys are the moments when I don't approach them when they're have a need, or when they are hurting or have questions, or I can tell maybe they have something they want to talk about and they don't want to talk about. And I approach them in a teaching manner, or I approach them with a lot of verbiage or those kind of things. The ways that I have learned most is to sit with them, is to actually listen and let them know that this relationship is here. It exists first. This is the place. Not trying to jump ahead, whereas you'll see in a second where in verse 16 it says, for I am lonely and afflicted. Well, let's jump into that. How can we get you out of being lonely and afflicted? You know where he begins? He begins with who God is first. And it is so easy for us to do that with everyone, not just our children. Because we get so afraid of what it's like to have anxiety about where is this person hurting, or where they are, or where we may be hurting and lamenting and lonely and afflicted. And even as he says, the troubles of his heart are enlarged. But he begins through the friendship, through the relationship of God. And he even uses this word covenant. The friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant. Old Testament language that talks about this relationship that is established with God is long before even David existed. It's language that was carried over from Abraham and Moses. It's carried all the way to David to let him know how loved he is. It highlights God's relationship with his people that is steadfast. It's a word that they would recognize in reading this as children, just like any letter of the alphabet, to say God keeps his promise. He is worthy. Not only does he shape our memory, but he is the one we can come hide in. His character is what we go through. Covenant is a thing like we deal with often. It's something oftentimes you see in a wedding ceremony, where there are vows, where there are things given, rings exchanged, a picture, a testimony of that. That's actually a picture of an old Testament view of covenant, where terms were kept in that relationship. And if you look from Genesis to Revelation, the number one picture that we've looked at before is how God sees us as people is with this covenant, with marriage. And the one who is faithful to keep the terms over and over and over is him. That to have him as a friend, to have him and be in covenant means he knows us and loves us. Because that's what helps us enter into the end of this. See, if you notice, even in verse 16, it says, "Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted." See, where do you go when you hit the trouble? When you feel that pain, we find a refuge. And this is why David uses that word over and over. If you read the Psalms at all, you'll find, or do a word study, you'll see the word refuge just pop up over and over and over. Because the word refuge means when you experience those things, what do you find yourself hiding in? Is it seeing a certain number in your bank account? Is it seeing a certain relationship that you have flourish? Because here's the thing, if we begin to go and find refuge in those things, they will not hold up like God will. It doesn't mean those things aren't worthy to love and put love into. But if you find the ultimate refuge in those things, they will not be able to hold that. And where you go, and take the pulse, put the fingers on the pulse of where you find yourself finding refuge when you go to those places is so important. Where you choose to hide. Listen to what he says in verse 20. "Oh, guard my soul and deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for I take refuge in you." Let me not be put to shame. What's he saying? He's referring back to, let me not put my trust in something that cannot hold. But he goes through the relationship with God. Because if he doesn't, what does? What informs your memory? What informs your relationship? If we first go with all of that, it doesn't mean we're not honest. What's beautiful about this psalm, and I think that I love most about it, is it doesn't end with just the rosy, easy stuff. Sometimes the Psalms do. Sometimes they end with this triumphant note, and it's easy to leave with that. But it actually ends with him saying, "Consider my affliction. The troubles of my heart are enlarged." I cannot get over that line, how perfect that is and how much it feels when our troubles are enlarged, physically, emotionally. But it means, where are we hiding? And when God says, "Where are you?" what do you say? See, what do you think God most wants from you? That's actually a really good question to ask. Do you think he wants you just to be a good worker for him? Do you think, amen, do you think he wants to be? Do you think he wants you to do everything right and perfect in your life? Do you think he wants you to have everything done well? Do you think he wants you to be this perfect, repentant person? You know what he wants most from you is you. It's you. He wants you. And what changes you the most, if you actually want to change in your life, if you actually want to see transformation, it's not through information. It's not through just trying to do it better. It's by being closer and closer and closer to him. Because the trouble doesn't stop. But what gets bigger than that? It's him. If we find ourselves hidden in him. And here's what's amazing, that he continues to seek us. I don't know if you read this book. We started with Sesame Street. We're ending with something else. You ever read the book Runaway Bunny? So good. Such a good book. It's about a mama bunny reading to her baby bunny. And the whole conversation, the dialogue starts with the baby bunny going, I'm going to run away. And she's like, all right, where are you going to go? And the baby bunny says things like, I'm going to become a fish and I'm going to jump in a stream. And she's like, well, I'll be a fisherman and I'll catch you. He's like, huh. Well, I'm going to be a rock. I'm going to be way up on that mountain. How are you going to get me there? I'm going to become a mountain climber and I'll come find you. And it just keeps going. And it ends with a baby bunny saying, man, wherever you are, wherever I am, you're there. I might as well just run home to you. She says, yeah, why don't you run into my arms and I'll hug you. And then she says, have a carrot. We have a God that continues to pursue us. Wherever you are, he will find you there. This is the kind of God he is. This is the one who his relationship to you is unlike any other. If you want to know how to right size your pain, to make it something that you feel and walk through, and yet have a God who connects to it, this is the God who does it. And we have no better picture than this table. This table behind me is the ultimate picture of what God has done. And we get to taste and see that he is good. What a good gift God gives to his children. That we are so elementary that he gives us something to taste and feel, all of us. It's not just one age. That this table proves true because it's not my body and blood and it's not yours. It's actually Jesus's body and blood given. This is his. And here's the thing, in order to come take it, you have to be in relationship to him. You don't want to come to this table and act like you have a relationship with him, because that would be disingenuous. That'd be coming and saying, like, you have all this and you're putting your trust in him, but really you don't think that. We all struggle, that's different. What I mean is actually looking to Jesus, saying, Jesus, remind me that you are that. Like David says here, the troubles of his heart are enlarged. But where is he constantly going to make sense of that? He's going to the Lord. That's how we come to this table. And then that's how we bring our real self here, is knowing who we really are. Praise be to God.